October 15th, 1942. The humid Pacific air clung to the corrugated metal hangar like a second skin at Henderson Field, Guadalcanal. Technical Sergeant Charles Chuck Morrison wiped the grease from calloused hands that had known the rhythm of Detroit assembly lines for 15 years before Pearl Harbor changed everything. The acrid smell of high-octane aviation fuel mixed with the salt breeze carried the weight of American desperation, while the distant rumble of Japanese artillery reminded every soul on that contested island that death waited beyond the jungle tree line. In the suffocating heat of that makeshift repair bay, Morrison stared at the battered P-38 Lightning before him, its aluminum fuselage riddled with bullet holes from another desperate dogfight above the Solomon Islands. He had no idea that his next decision would fundamentally alter the nature of aerial warfare in the Pacific theater, transforming American fighter planes into phantoms that could slip through Japanese detection networks like ghosts through moonlight, invisible to the most sophisticated radar systems the enemy had ever deployed. The Solomon Islands campaign had become a grinding war of attrition, where every aircraft lost represented not just strategic disadvantage, but the extinguishing of irreplaceable pilot experience accumulated through months of desperate combat. By October 1942, American forces had learned the bitter lesson that technological superiority alone could not guarantee victory against an enemy who had spent the better part of 4 years perfecting their radar-guided interception techniques across the conquered territories of the Pacific. Japanese Type A Mark II radar installations, positioned strategically across captured islands from Rabaul to the Gilbert Chain, had created an invisible net of electromagnetic surveillance that seemed to catch every approaching American formation before they could reach their intended targets. Squadron after squadron had limped back to Henderson Field with devastating losses, their aluminum wings bearing testament to the deadly accuracy of radar-directed Zero fighters that appeared from nowhere with the precision of predatory birds guided by some supernatural force. The statistics painted a picture of systematic American defeat that military censors worked desperately to conceal from the home front. In the 3 months since the initial landing on Guadalcanal, American air losses had reached 43% of committed aircraft, with pilot casualties running even higher as experienced aviators were shot down faster than training programs could replace them. Intelligence reports captured from downed Japanese aircraft revealed the terrible truth. Enemy radar operators were tracking American formations from distances exceeding 60 miles, providing Zero fighter squadrons with precise altitude, heading, and estimated arrival times that transformed aerial combat from dynamic dogfighting into methodical execution. The Japanese had turned the vast Pacific sky into a killing field where American aircraft flew predictable patterns toward their own destruction. Morrison, a former assembly line supervisor at Ford's Willow Run plant, who had enlisted 3 days after Pearl Harbor, understood machinery in ways that formal engineering education could never teach. His weathered hands had assembled B-24 Liberator components with precision measured in thousandths of an inch, and his intuitive grasp of mechanical principles had earned him rapid promotion to technical sergeant despite his lack of formal credentials. But the war had taken a deeply personal toll on the quiet mechanic from Dearborn, Michigan. His younger brother David, a B-25 Mitchell Navigator with the 42nd Bombardment Squadron, had been shot down 3 weeks earlier during what should have been a routine bombing run against Japanese installations on Bougainville Island. The official War Department telegram listed the crew as missing in action, but Morrison knew the brutal truth that military euphemism could not soften. Japanese radar had guided Zero fighters directly to his brother's formation with such precision that the bombers never had a chance to defend themselves or complete their mission. That night, alone in his canvas tent, with only the distant sound of artillery fire and the occasional scream of incoming mortars for company, Morrison made a decision that would echo through aviation history with consequences neither he nor anyone else could imagine. He would find a way to make American aircraft invisible to Japanese radar systems, or die trying. The mathematics of the problem seemed impossibly complex, but Morrison's practical mind approached challenges differently than formally trained engineers. Where others saw electromagnetic theory and wave propagation equations, he saw a mechanical problem that could be solved through careful observation and methodical experimentation. The breakthrough began with Morrison's systematic analysis of damaged aircraft returning from combat missions over Japanese-controlled territory. Working by the harsh light of portable generators in the repair hangar, he spent countless hours examining bullet holes, documenting damage patterns, and correlating battle damage with mission survival rates. What emerged from this painstaking investigation was a pattern so subtle that more formally educated observers had completely missed its significance. Aircraft with extensive surface irregularities, dents, patches, and makeshift repairs seemed to suffer significantly fewer casualties from radar-guided attacks than their pristine counterparts flying identical missions. Morrison's mechanical intuition led him to a fundamental understanding that would revolutionize aerial warfare. He realized that radar waves behaved like light, reflecting off surfaces at predictable angles according to basic laws of physics that any high school student could comprehend. Standard American aircraft, manufactured with the precision and geometric perfection that characterized Detroit's automotive industry, created ideal reflective surfaces that bounced radar signals directly back to Japanese receivers with maximum strength and clarity. The smooth aluminum skin of a P-38 Lightning or P-51 Mustang acted like a mirror in the electromagnetic spectrum, announcing its presence to enemy radar operators with unmistakable clarity across dozens of miles of Pacific sky. But Morrison's analysis revealed that irregular surfaces scattered those same radar signals in multiple directions, dramatically reducing the strength of reflected energy that actually reached enemy detection equipment. The principle was elegantly simple. Instead of reflecting radar waves back to their source like a mirror, a surface covered with properly angled irregularities would scatter electromagnetic energy in countless directions, with only a tiny fraction returning to reveal the aircraft's position. Japanese radar operators, trained to recognize the strong, clear returns from conventional aircraft, would find their screens filled with weak, confused signals indistinguishable from atmospheric interference or distant weather phenomena. Working through the humid nights of October 1942, Morrison began developing what would become known throughout the Pacific theater as the Morrison modification, or simply going invisible. Using salvaged materials, improvised tools, and mathematical principles learned from correspondence courses taken during peacetime, he systematically altered the electromagnetic signature of a single P-38 Lightning that had been written off as too badly damaged for conventional repair. Small triangular metal deflectors, carefully cut from the wreckage of destroyed aircraft and welded at precisely calculated angles, transformed the smooth fuselage into a complex geometric pattern that would scatter radar energy without compromising the aircraft's structural integrity or aerodynamic performance. The work required mathematical precision disguised as random battle damage. Each modification had to appear accidental to casual observation while serving a specific purpose in the larger pattern of electromagnetic camouflage. Morrison calculated angles and distances using slide rules, trigonometry tables, and engineering handbooks borrowed from the base library, ensuring that scattered radar energy would disperse in directions that would not return strong signals to Japanese receivers positioned at known locations throughout the Solomon Island chain. The modified aircraft, looked like it had survived multiple combat encounters, its surface scarred and patched with apparently random repairs, but every mark served the calculated purpose of electromagnetic deception. Lieutenant Colonel James Dusty Rhodes, commanding officer of the 347th Fighter Group and a veteran of the European theater who had transferred to the Pacific. After witnessing the devastation of German radar-guided night fighters over England, initially viewed Morrison's project with skepticism, bordering on outright hostility. Military regulations strictly controlled aircraft modifications, and the idea that an enlisted mechanic with no formal engineering training could solve problems that had stymied West Point graduates and MIT-educated aeronautical engineers seemed not just preposterous, but potentially dangerous to pilot safety and mission effectiveness. Rhodes had seen too many well-intentioned modifications result in catastrophic structural failures, and he was not about to risk scarce aircraft and irreplaceable pilots on what appeared to be the delusions of a grief-stricken mechanic. But desperate circumstances demanded desperate measures, and American losses to radar-guided Japanese attacks had reached levels that threatened the entire Guadalcanal operation. Intelligence estimates suggested that unless American air losses could be reduced by at least 30% within the next month, Japanese forces would achieve air superiority over the Solomon Islands, making continued American presence on Guadalcanal untenable. Against his better judgment and in direct violation of several Army Air Forces regulations, Rhodes authorized a single test flight with Morrison's modified P-38, warning that any structural failure or mission compromise would result in immediate court-martial proceedings for everyone involved in the unauthorized experiment. Captain William Bill Mackenzie, a 24-year-old pilot from Kansas, who had accumulated 14 confirmed aerial victories and a distinguished Flying Cross during his 8 months in the Pacific Theater, volunteered to fly the modified aircraft on its maiden combat mission. Mackenzie had lost his wingman and closest friend to a radar-guided attack just 5 days earlier, watching helplessly as Zero fighters appeared from nowhere to destroy Lieutenant Tommy Harrison's P-38 with surgical precision that spoke of perfect advance warning. The young captain understood the strategic importance of Morrison's experiment better than most senior officers, having experienced firsthand the deadly effectiveness of Japanese radar-guided interception procedures that seemed to anticipate American tactics with supernatural accuracy. The flight plan called for a high-risk reconnaissance mission over heavily defended Japanese installations on New Georgia Island, following the exact route where previous American aircraft had been consistently intercepted with devastating results. If Morrison's modifications worked as theorized, Mackenzie would reach the target area undetected, photograph enemy positions, and return with intelligence that could save dozens of American lives in future operations. If the electromagnetic camouflage failed, he would likely join the growing list of American pilots missing in action over the Solomon Islands. Another casualty of Japanese technological superiority in aerial warfare. October 22nd, 1942, dawned clear and humid, with visibility extending to the horizon in all directions and atmospheric conditions ideal for radar detection. Mackenzie completed his pre-flight inspection of Morrison's modified P-38 with particular attention to the numerous metal deflectors and surface irregularities that gave the aircraft an appearance of having survived multiple combat encounters. The mathematical precision of the modifications became apparent only upon close examination. What looked like random battle damage was actually a carefully calculated pattern designed to scatter electromagnetic energy in specific directions. Ground crew members watched with a mixture of curiosity and concern as the scarred fighter taxied to the end of Henderson Field's coral runway, its twin Allison V-1710 engines producing the distinctive high-pitched whine that had earned the P-38 its Japanese nickname, Fork-tailed Devil. The takeoff proceeded normally, with Morrison's modifications showing no adverse effects on the aircraft's handling characteristics or performance parameters. Within minutes, Mackenzie's P-38 had disappeared into the vast Pacific sky, carrying with it the hopes of every American pilot who had ever faced the deadly accuracy of radar-guided Japanese interceptors. The success or failure of this single mission would determine whether Morrison's electromagnetic camouflage concept represented a breakthrough in aerial warfare, or merely the desperate fantasy of a grieving mechanic who had lost his brother to enemy action. Japanese radar operators at Station Zebra 7 on New Georgia Island maintained their usual professional vigilance as Mackenzie's modified P-38 approached their maximum detection range. Chief Petty Officer Yamamoto Kenji, a veteran radar operator with over 200 successful intercepts to his credit and a technical education that rivaled many American engineering officers, monitored his Type A Mark II radar screen with the practiced attention that had made him one of the most effective early warning specialists in the Imperial Japanese Navy. His radar installation had never failed to detect approaching American aircraft at maximum range, providing ample time for Zero fighter squadrons to climb to intercept altitude and position themselves for devastating attacks that had become routine in the Solomon Islands theater. But on this crystalline morning, something unprecedented occurred that would shake Japanese confidence in their technological superiority. Mackenzie's aircraft passed through the outer detection zone without triggering any response from radar systems that had proven flawlessly reliable for months of combat operations. The modified P-38's scattered electromagnetic signature registered as background noise, indistinguishable from atmospheric interference, distant lightning strikes, or the electronic hash that characterized empty skies. Yamamoto checked his equipment twice, then 3 times, unable to understand why his normally reliable instruments showed nothing but empty air when Japanese coastal observers reported the distinctive sound of twin-engine aircraft approaching from the southeast. For the first time since his assignment to radar duty 18 months earlier, the veteran operator experienced the unsettling sensation of technological blindness. His instruments, which had guided hundreds of successful intercepts, seemed to have lost their ability to penetrate the electromagnetic spectrum. Other operators at nearby stations reported similar anomalies, their screens showing confused returns that defied conventional interpretation. The invisible American aircraft had achieved something that Japanese military engineers had deemed theoretically impossible: complete radar stealth using nothing more sophisticated than carefully positioned metal deflectors and mathematical precision. Mackenzie completed his reconnaissance mission without encountering a single Japanese interceptor, photographing enemy installations and troop movements with impunity while radar-guided Zero fighters remained on the ground, their pilots unaware that an American aircraft had penetrated deep into defended airspace and was systematically documenting their positions. The modified P-38 returned to Henderson Field, carrying intelligence photographs that would prove invaluable in planning future operations. But more importantly, it carried definitive proof that Morrison's electromagnetic camouflage concept actually worked under operational combat conditions. The success of that initial mission sparked a transformation in American tactical thinking that would ripple through every level of Pacific Theater operations, from squadron level to the highest strategic planning committees in Washington. Morrison's modification techniques were immediately classified under the highest security protocols available, with technical specifications distributed only to selected maintenance personnel at forward air bases who had been cleared for access to the most sensitive military secrets. Within weeks, entire squadrons of P-38 Lightnings, P-51 Mustangs, and P-47 Thunderbolts had received the invisible treatment. Their pristine aluminum surfaces transformed into complex patterns of calculated irregularity that confused Japanese radar operators across thousands of miles of Pacific Ocean. The psychological impact on Japanese air defense personnel proved as devastating as the tactical advantages gained by American forces. Radar operators who had spent months developing expertise in aircraft detection and tracking suddenly found their screens empty during periods when they could clearly hear approaching enemy formations. The technological reliability that had made Japanese radar-guided interception so deadly began to crumble as American aircraft seemed to appear and disappear at will, striking strategic targets without warning and vanishing before defensive fighters could scramble to intercept altitude. Morrison's innovation represented far more than clever engineering or battlefield improvisation. It embodied the fundamental American approach to warfare that would ultimately prove decisive throughout the Pacific theater. Where Japanese military doctrine emphasized rigid adherence to proven techniques, standardized procedures, and hierarchical decision-making that discouraged individual initiative, American forces demonstrated remarkable adaptability and institutional willingness to embrace unconventional solutions developed by personnel at every level of the military hierarchy. Morrison, working alone in a makeshift hangar with salvaged materials and improvised tools, had accomplished what entire Japanese research departments staffed by university-trained engineers had failed to anticipate. The marriage of practical mechanical knowledge with theoretical understanding of electromagnetic principles. The Invisible Aircraft program expanded rapidly as word of its success spread through American air units across the Pacific, carried by pilots, mechanics, and intelligence officers who recognized the strategic implications of radar-invisible aircraft. By December 1942, modified American fighters were conducting deep penetration missions over heavily defended Japanese strongholds from the Marshalls to the Philippines, their radar-invisible configurations allowing unprecedented access to enemy territory that had previously been considered impregnable. The strategic implications were enormous and far-reaching. American intelligence gathering improved dramatically as reconnaissance aircraft could operate without detection, while bombing missions achieved complete tactical surprise against targets that had been virtually untouchable due to sophisticated radar early warning networks. Morrison's workshop on Guadalcanal became an unlikely center of military innovation as pilots, mechanics, and intelligence officers collaborated to refine the electromagnetic camouflage techniques through systematic experimentation and combat testing. Each successful mission provided valuable data that improved the modification process, and soon American aircraft were disappearing from Japanese radar screens with such consistency that enemy commanders began questioning the fundamental reliability of their detection equipment. The psychological warfare aspect proved almost as valuable as the tactical advantages, as Japanese pilots gradually lost confidence in ground-controlled interception procedures that no longer provided reliable early warning of approaching American formations. The transformation of American air operations in the Pacific theater represented a fundamental shift in the balance of technological advantage that had favored Japanese forces throughout the early war years. Japanese military forces, which had dominated aerial combat from Pearl Harbor through the Doolittle Raid, through superior tactics, training, and equipment, suddenly found themselves facing an enemy that could strike without warning and disappear before effective retaliation became possible. The Invisible Aircraft program demonstrated how individual innovation, supported by institutional flexibility and willingness to challenge conventional wisdom, could overcome seemingly insurmountable technical obstacles through creative application of basic scientific principles. By early 1943, Japanese military leadership at the highest levels had begun to recognize the scope of the problem they faced from American radar-invisible aircraft. Intercepted communications revealed growing frustration among enemy radar operators who reported consistent equipment failures and complete inability to track American formations that should have been easily detectable using proven procedures. Some Japanese commanders suspected systematic sabotage of radar installations or widespread equipment malfunction, never imagining that American mechanics working with basic tools and salvaged materials had discovered methods to render their aircraft electronically invisible through simple surface modifications based on fundamental electromagnetic principles. The strategic value of Morrison's discovery extended far beyond immediate tactical advantages to reshape the entire American bombing campaign against Japanese industrial and military targets throughout the Pacific. American B-24 Liberator and B-25 Mitchell formations could now approach heavily defended objectives without triggering radar-guided defensive responses, allowing unprecedented destruction of enemy manufacturing capacity, fuel depots, and transportation infrastructure. The systematic destruction of Japanese industrial capability accelerated dramatically as invisible American bombers struck with complete impunity against targets that enemy commanders believed were adequately protected by the most sophisticated radar networks available to any military force in the world. Morrison himself remained largely unaware of the broader strategic implications of his innovation, continuing to work in his corrugated metal hangar on Guadalcanal, while modified American aircraft struck targets across thousands of miles of Pacific theater operations. The quiet mechanic from Detroit's industrial suburbs had solved one of the war's most pressing tactical problems through pure mechanical intuition combined with systematic experimentation, demonstrating that sophisticated military challenges could sometimes yield to practical solutions developed by individuals with deep understanding of basic engineering principles rather than formal academic credentials. The Japanese response to invisible American aircraft revealed fundamental weaknesses in enemy military doctrine that would prove increasingly decisive as the war progressed toward its inevitable conclusion. Rather than adapting their radar technology or developing new detection methods through systematic research and development, Japanese commanders initially dismissed reports of undetectable American aircraft as pilot error, equipment malfunction, or deliberate exaggeration by personnel seeking to excuse operational failures. This rigid adherence to established procedures, while providing organizational stability and tactical consistency, ultimately prevented Japanese forces from responding effectively to American innovations that challenged their technological assumptions. As 1943 progressed through the pivotal battles for the Gilbert and Marshall Islands, the cumulative impact of invisible American aircraft operations began to reshape the entire strategic situation in the Pacific theater. Japanese air defenses, carefully designed around radar-guided interception techniques that had proven devastatingly effective against conventional aircraft, became increasingly ineffective against modified American formations that could penetrate defended airspace without providing any advance warning to ground controllers or fighter pilots. The psychological impact on enemy aviators proved as devastating as the material losses inflicted by surprise attacks, as Japanese pilots gradually lost confidence in ground-controlled interception procedures that no longer provided the reliable early warning that had made them so effective during the early war years. Morrison's electromagnetic camouflage techniques represented a uniquely American approach to military innovation that reflected the democratic values and industrial capabilities that would ultimately prove decisive in the global conflict. Unlike Japanese military research, which emphasized hierarchical control, standardized procedures, and centralized decision-making that discouraged individual initiative, the Invisible Aircraft Program encouraged experimentation and creative problem-solving at every organizational level. Mechanics like Morrison worked alongside university-trained engineers, experienced pilots collaborated with recent flight school graduates, and intelligence officers shared information freely across traditional military boundaries in pursuit of tactical advantages that could save American lives and shorten the war. The success of invisible American aircraft also demonstrated the critical importance of understanding enemy capabilities and limitations through careful intelligence analysis combined with creative tactical thinking. Morrison's breakthrough came from systematic analysis of captured Japanese radar equipment and documented interception procedures, combined with practical mechanical knowledge that allowed him to identify exploitable weaknesses in enemy detection systems that more formally educated observers had completely overlooked. This intelligence-driven approach to tactical innovation would become a distinctive hallmark of American military operations throughout the remainder of the Pacific War and beyond. By mid-1943, Japanese military leadership at the highest levels of the Imperial General Staff had begun to comprehend the full scope of the technological challenge they faced from invisible American aircraft. Emergency conferences convened in Tokyo to address the radar detection crisis, but Japanese engineers and military scientists proved unable to develop effective countermeasures against American electromagnetic camouflage techniques that seemed to violate fundamental assumptions about radar detection theory. The technological advantage that had served Japanese forces so well during the conquest of Southeast Asia and the early Pacific campaigns had been neutralized by a Detroit mechanic working with salvaged materials in a corrugated metal hangar on a contested island thousands of miles from the nearest major American base. The invisible aircraft program's impact extended far beyond immediate military applications to influence post-war aviation development and the emerging field of electronic warfare. Morrison's surface modification techniques provided the theoretical foundation for stealth technology that would revolutionize military aviation in subsequent decades, demonstrating how wartime innovations developed under combat pressure could have lasting implications for technological development. The principle of scattering radar energy through irregular surface configurations became a cornerstone of advanced aircraft design, proving that practical solutions developed in wartime could reshape entire industries during peacetime. Morrison's personal story embodied fundamental truths about American military effectiveness that extended far beyond individual tactical innovations to reflect the democratic values and industrial capabilities that characterized the American war effort. The Invisible Aircraft program succeeded because it combined practical engineering knowledge with institutional flexibility that allowed innovative solutions to emerge from unexpected sources throughout the military hierarchy. A Detroit assembly line worker, given the freedom to experiment and the institutional support to test his ideas under combat conditions, had solved a complex technological problem that challenged the most sophisticated military engineers of his era. The psychological transformation of American air operations in the Pacific theater reflected broader changes in military confidence and tactical thinking that would influence strategic planning for the remainder of the war. Pilots who had previously approached heavily defended targets with understandable apprehension born of bitter experience now flew their invisible aircraft with renewed confidence and aggressive determination, knowing that Japanese radar systems could no longer provide early warning of their approach to enemy commanders and fighter pilots. This fundamental shift in pilot morale and tactical confidence translated directly into improved operational effectiveness as American air crews pressed home attacks with determination born of technological advantage rather than desperate courage alone. As the war progressed toward its climactic battles for Iwo Jima and Okinawa, Morrison's electromagnetic camouflage techniques continued to evolve and improve through systematic refinement and combat testing. New materials salvaged from destroyed enemy aircraft and more sophisticated modification procedures developed through collaborative experimentation enhanced the radar-invisible capabilities of American aircraft, while Japanese countermeasures remained fundamentally inadequate to address the basic challenge posed by scattered electromagnetic signatures. the invisible aircraft program had become an integral component of American air superiority in the Pacific theater, contributing to the systematic destruction of Japanese military capacity that made ultimate victory inevitable. The lasting significance of Morrison's innovation lay not merely in its immediate tactical impact on Pacific theater operations, but in its broader demonstration of American adaptability, industrial creativity, and willingness to embrace unconventional solutions that challenge established military doctrine. In a global conflict where technological advantage could determine strategic outcomes and ultimately decide the fate of nations, a single mechanic's insight had fundamentally altered the balance of power in aerial warfare. The invisible wings that emerged from his improvised Guadalcanal workshop represented the triumph of practical intelligence over rigid military bureaucracy, proving that individual innovation, supported by institutional flexibility, could change the course of history. The symbolic power of Morrison's invisible aircraft extended beyond their immediate military effectiveness to represent core American values of ingenuity, democratic innovation, and industrial adaptability that would define the American century. Unlike the hierarchical research structures and rigid procedural requirements that characterized enemy military development, the invisible aircraft program succeeded through collaborative effort and shared expertise that drew strength from diverse backgrounds, educational levels, and professional experiences. Morrison's Detroit assembly line experience proved as valuable as formal engineering education in solving complex electromagnetic challenges, demonstrating that American democracy's greatest strength lay in its ability to harness individual creativity for collective purposes. In the vast Pacific theater, where geographic distance and technological capability determined strategic possibilities and tactical limitations, Morrison's invisible aircraft represented American industrial abundance transformed into decisive tactical advantage through individual innovation and institutional support. The materials he used: salvaged aluminum from destroyed aircraft, improvised tools fabricated from available supplies, basic trigonometry tables borrowed from the base library, reflected the resourcefulness and adaptability that characterized American military operations throughout the global conflict. Where enemy forces relied on rigid procedures, standardized equipment, and centralized decision-making, American innovation flourished through creative adaptation of available resources guided by practical intelligence rather than theoretical perfection. The profound silence that surrounded invisible American aircraft as they slipped through Japanese radar networks undetected became a powerful symbol of democratic stealth, representing freedom's ability to move unseen through totalitarian surveillance systems that seemed impregnable to conventional approaches. Morrison's electromagnetic camouflage techniques had accomplished far more than simply hiding aircraft from enemy detection. They had demonstrated that authoritarian technological systems, however sophisticated and systematically implemented, contained fundamental vulnerabilities that democratic innovation could identify and exploit through creative application of basic scientific principles. October 15, 1945. Exactly 3 years to the day after Morrison first began his invisible modifications in that sweltering Guadalcanal hangar, the mechanic from Detroit stood once again surrounded by American aircraft, this time at McClellan Field in California, where thousands of war-weary fighters and bombers were being prepared for post-war service or peaceful storage. The global conflict had ended with Japanese surrender following the atomic bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, and Morrison's invisible wings had played their part in carrying American air power to ultimate victory across the Pacific's vast expanse. The scarred and patched surfaces of modified aircraft bore silent witness to the triumph of practical innovation over rigid military doctrine, their electromagnetic camouflage systems no longer needed but permanently embedded in aviation history. As Morrison watched maintenance crews systematically removing the modification plates and surface deflectors from decommissioned fighters, he understood with quiet satisfaction that his true achievement lay not in the technical solution itself, however elegant and effective it had proven under combat conditions. His lasting contribution to American victory had been the demonstration that individual insight, supported by institutional freedom and democratic values, could overcome seemingly insurmountable technological challenges through systematic application of basic scientific principles. The Invisible Aircraft program had proven conclusively that in the fundamental contest between democratic innovation and authoritarian rigidity, the side that encouraged creative thinking and embraced adaptive change would ultimately prevail. In the gathering twilight of victory, with the Pacific sun setting beyond the California mountains, Morrison's modified aircraft stood as enduring monuments to the power of human ingenuity unleashed by democratic freedom and supported by industrial abundance. Their scarred wings caught the last light of a world transformed by global conflict, reflecting not just the technical brilliance of electromagnetic camouflage, but the deeper truth that individual creativity, when given institutional support and freedom to experiment, could reshape the fundamental nature of warfare itself. The invisible wings had carried American democracy to victory not through superior firepower alone, but through the marriage of practical intelligence with unlimited potential for innovation that would define the American approach to technological challenges for generations to come.